They were once, it seems, a power couple, married and TikTok stars.
All right, here's the truth. I don't think you're ready for it.
But according to court records, she was afraid for her life. And weeks after a wife posted this video accusing her husband of being a pedophile, a chilling call came into 911.
I could hear a female in the background screaming and crying, some sort of loud bang in the background.
Now, they're both dead. What we have learned about what allegedly happened and the grotesque allegations he faced before unleashing violence inside her home. We're on the case presented by Law & Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. It is scary to look at the social media trail that may be at the center of this case out of Oklahoma and to see the post that may have triggered the violence, along with court orders that apparently could not stop it.
Okay, if you've been seeing this Pavoy ring all over TikTok like I have, just buy it. Click the link below and buy it. I just think this is so cute.
This is Sarah Gilson. She was a social media influencer based in Tulsa. She had more than 14,000 followers on TikTok, and her social media was really lifestyle focused. She was fashionable. She gave ideas to other people looking for items to buy. And she was also a mom to 2 kids. And sadly, those children will now be growing up without their mom. Sarah also went by the last name Duffy. She was married legally to 48-year-old Jeremiah Duffy, who went by Sean. Here's a picture of the two of them together. And on social media, he was known as Duff Daddy. He had a big following on TikTok as well. That post was from a previous account of his. His main account, though, Duff Daddy 1 on TikTok, has more than 347,000 followers. It is now private, and that may have to do with what Sarah appears to have posted recently about Sean on social media. So let's get into what happened. It appears over the last several weeks. This is a post that Sarah put on her TikTok on July 11th. Now, this is the trend. You've probably seen it all over social media, people sitting down like they're at the start of a Netflix documentary. But Sarah's post says, quote, "Preparing for when Netflix drops a documentary about my soon-to-be ex-husband, who I just found out is a pedophile." And that post has more than 17 million views. So when people saw the post, they started wondering, what in the world was she talking about? But when you go through court records, you can see that things were not always very smooth when it came to the Duffys. Now, this is the Oklahoma State Courts Network. It is where you go when you're covering a case in Oklahoma to get information about it. And depending on the county, Oklahoma can be pretty difficult to get documents out of, especially when you're calling from out of state. But OSCN, this database, does give you a pretty good amount of information on the front page of cases. So when we look up Jeremiah Duffy, we can see that on June 10th, Sarah filed for an order of protection against him. And the judge ruled that Sean had to stay away from Sarah's house and that he needed to remain 100 yards away from her at all times. On that same day, June 10th, another woman filed for an order of protection against Jeremiah Sean Duffy. And in that order, a judge ruled that Sean had to stay 100 yards away from, quote, the child and the child's home at all times. Sarah posted on June 20th this video here of the ocean with the words on it that says, quote, "and he sure did." Now, the caption to that post was longer, and this is what it said, quote, "Thank you for the Army. Your thoughts, prayers, and gift cards have meant more than you know. While I'm grieving and trying to process the worst thing imaginable, I'm solely focused on my children and their well-being. Their safety and mental health is my only concern at this time. We are not okay, and I'm not sure I'll ever be the same, but God has been so faithful in this process, and I feel his presence in everything I do. Let's all remember to pray for the victim and respect her privacy." So this is what we know about what allegedly led to the protective orders in June and the post that you just saw there. So the Oklahoman newspaper reports that the protective order filed by the woman other than Sarah is the mom of a 15-year-old girl who played basketball for Duffy because he was also a youth basketball coach. And the order alleges that another coach walked in on him, allegedly kissing and fondling that 15-year-old girl. And the girl also allegedly told her mom that Duffy sent her inappropriate text messages, invited her to a hotel, and gave her money to, quote, keep her quiet. Quote, similar conduct by this coach towards this particular juvenile player was reported to have occurred over an extended period of time in multiple law enforcement jurisdictions across multiple states prior to this incident, police told NBC News. Now, the Oklahoma newspaper also reports that Sarah's filing claims that Duffy had threatened suicide, that he, quote, went on the run and had a gun. Now, police were apparently trying to find Sean after that order was filed back in June. I also want to point out that this was not the first time that Sarah had apparently filed for an order of protection against Sean Duffy. This is from 2021, and this was where Sarah requested for an order of protection. And that order was dismissed because, according to court records that we can see, Sarah didn't show up for court. And it appears after that, Sean and Sarah, they were still together to some extent. There are pictures of them together on social media. And in the wake of the news last week, actually a local television reporter in Oklahoma posted that she had interviewed the Duffys earlier this year for a story that didn't have to do with them, but they were together. Even though there was an order of protection against Sean, it appears that it did little to protect Sarah. On Thursday, July 23rd, police responded to a call at the couple's home in Collinsville, Oklahoma. It was around 11:15 at night.
G6, I'm trying to reach him back, but I could hear a female in the background screaming and crying, some sort of loud bang in the background.
Police rushed to Sarah's home, and minutes later, dispatchers said this.
An old male that we were looking for a few weeks ago after he got caught kissing a juvenile.
When police got to Sarah's home, they found her dead. Sean was also there. Both of them had been shot in the head. Police believe that Sean shot Sarah, then turned the gun on himself, according to NBC. Now, the accusations that Sean faced, they were very serious. So you might be wondering why he was still out and not in custody, not with charges hanging over him. Well, according to NBC News, Sean was a member of the Osage tribe, and the alleged sexual abuse happened on tribal land. And that means local authorities did not have jurisdiction on the case. Police said that they submitted the case for a charge of lewd molestation of a minor to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in a news release that was sent to media outlets, the police said, quote, this incident was considered a major crime under the Federal Major Crimes Act in Indian Country. The report listing the crime of lewd molestation of a minor was sent to the U.S. Attorney's Office for review, ending the jurisdiction of the Owasso Police Department over this reported incident. So you also now have people who knew this couple from both sides, and they're alleging that Sean had a dark history. Sean's ex-wife told TMZ that he had threatened her multiple times during their 20-year relationship. She said that she found the violence, Sean allegedly shooting and killing Sarah, then turning the gun on himself. She said it was shocking, according to TMZ, but she wasn't surprised. And she believed that it wasn't just the TikTok post alleging that he was a pedophile that was the cause for this deadly violence, but she believes that there was also something to Sean where he would get jealous. And the idea that a partner would leave him is something that he couldn't live with. Now, Sarah's ex-husband, who is also the father of her two children, spoke to People magazine. He said, quote, she had been stuck in a relationship where domestic abuse seemed okay. I had begged her for years to get away from him. I had offered to help her in any way I could to get away from him, but he seemed to have some sort of control over her, and she couldn't seem to get away. That's what Lyle Landers told People magazine. Just 2 days before her death, Sarah posted this on TikTok. It's her final post, and it's her on the bow of a boat looking out on the water with the words, may whatever the F word that was, never find me again. There is a GoFundMe page that is raising money for her two children, and it reads in part, quote, Sarah was an incredible mom. Her children were the center of her world, and everything she did was for them. She loved them fiercely, worked hard to provide for them, and dreamed of giving them the best life possible. Joining us now to talk more about this case is Jack Rice, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, and a former CIA officer. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. These cases, where there were protective orders in the past, and clearly there was a couple of protective orders in just the last month, and then to see how this played out, it is tragic beyond words. as someone who, as a former prosecutor, even on the defense side, and you see cases of domestic violence, what stands out to you with what is being laid out to this point about what happened with Sean Duffy and Sarah Gilson?
Yeah, this is brutal. I mean, it's just brutal because I don't want to say this is foreseeable, but if you look at the statistics of domestic assault, domestic violence, and you look at the statistics of when it's the most dangerous, this is that moment. We're talking about June 10th, when all of a sudden she makes this decision to go and get an OFP, an order for protection, because on the 9th, the police said it appears that he's actually going to be charged with molestation. She makes this decision on the 10th. That's when you're sort of, dare I use the term, pulling that trigger, because that's when it becomes dangerous. Statistically, you can look at what this has done nationally. What we have seen is that you can look and find that with the murder of women in particular, you'll see about half of those who are murdered by a domestic partner. And if you look at those numbers, about half of those, it happens when they decide to leave. That's how dangerous this is. You look at the numbers and they're by the thousands. And so you realize this is the moment when it matters most. And that's the difficulty that the criminal justice system is facing, because is this going to be one of those normal ones where both sides will simply separate and they go their merry ways? Is it going to be that? Or is it going to be this? And the problem is you have judges across the country, Oklahoma or anywhere else, who are facing it.
Well, and I think back, so in 2021, Sarah files for an order of protection, and then that's dropped because she doesn't show up at the court hearing for it. And it appears that they had continued on in some capacity of having a relationship. And sadly, with covering a lot of these cases, like it's never, some of these relationships, like it's not like it was bad all the time. There's good and then there's bad. And then you have these very dark moments. And then maybe someone is able to pull someone back into that relationship. And it's just hard where you look back at 2021 and clearly something must have been going on there, but then they reconcile in some way. And it's like, what can the legal system do where you have someone like Sean Duffy, from what we're seeing in this story, was a violent person. His ex-wife talks about him being a violent person in her interview to TMZ. And yet you have this person who, like, yeah, she's not filing this order of protection. Maybe they're getting back together. Like, but there's still these concerns going forward. And now it's a major red flag in hindsight. Like, what more? And I know this is like the question that nobody has an answer to right now, but it's like, you look at this case and it's like, what more could have been done to protect this woman?
Yeah, that's the sad part of this. Chris, one of the things that I've done over the years is I've taught lawyers how to represent clients who have going to seek OFPs, orders for protection, or dealing with a no contact order issue. Essentially, the legal system stepping in to separate two people. And one of the things that we have seen over and over and over again is the amount of trauma that somebody faces. How do you go get that OFP in the first place? How many of those are dropped before they go get another one or another one? It happens all of the time. But the problem that you have, of course, is do you want a judicial system, a legal system, to step in and say to a victim or a complaining witness, depending on how you want to see this, do you want the court coming and saying, you're an adult, but we've decided we know better than you do? Do we want that? And that's the rub. That's the frustrating space. How far do you want a judicial system to say, we know better than you do? That's what makes it so hard.
Right. And it's one of those things where it's like, just for me as like the non-lawyer on the outside, it's like you wish after something in 2021, like that there was some sort of process where there's like a follow-up where it's like, okay, she's not going to file the order of protection, but like, is this a dangerous person? And I know that also then on the other side of it, like gets into like, are you violating an innocent person's rights? If it was just like a big misunderstanding. I mean, clearly in this case, that's not what we're dealing with. When you look at the allegations, like the fact that she went on social media and accused him of being a pedophile, wanted the world to see this, knowing what she knew. And then he was apparently going to be charged with a sex crime. And we'll talk about the process just in that part of it. Like, what do you make of seeing kind of how the social media part of this played out? Because they were both people who were, at least locally in Oklahoma, it seemed like notable people on TikTok.
Yeah, you realize just how complicated social media adds to this. All of a sudden, it could, to somebody who is violent, somebody who might be paranoid, somebody who might be self-involved, self-important, narcissistic, the personal injury that comes from having something go public. Oh, imagine excluding all that and having that happen to anybody and their response. Now let's drape over all those other characteristics on somebody and realize how that may actually drive them too. That may be the spark that starts this. Of course, that's not really the case. The problem, Chris, I've thought about this for decades now. How do you deal with this question? When we think about this issue, remember that there's two things going on at the same time. The OFP is a civil question. It's not a criminal question. So in other words, when somebody goes to seek an OFP, an order for protection, they go to the court and say, I have all of these reasons why I believe that this person must stay away from me. But it doesn't go to the criminal court, which means there's sort of an independent arbiter with a police officer or police officers who get involved in the investigation itself. I guess the question becomes, when you seek an OFP, does that or should that trigger a moment where the police automatically should get involved to investigate this as a potential domestic assault? Domestic assault on her, domestic assault on the children, domestic assault in some capacity. Should that in itself automatically target or drive the police to get involved whether she asks or not? Of course, here's the other side of that. If they did that automatically, would that stop some people from seeking the OFP in the first place, knowing full well that the police all of a sudden start getting up in everybody's business? It might, which could make it actually worse. See the conundrum there that we're facing?
Yeah. No, it is, because in a case like this, it is easy in hindsight to see all these things that are now red flags. And you're like, these are all moments where there could have been more intervention, that this man could have been taken potentially off the streets. And then you also think of the young woman who is the victim in the sex crime case, the lewd molestation of a minor case, which is what he was going to end up being charged with. Before we turn to that part of it, like, let's just say someone violates an order of protection. Like, typically, what is the punishment for that? Like, had this not end the way it did, Sean Duffy just goes to her house, which is inside the 100 meter or 100 yards that he was supposed to stay away from her. Like what would the penalty of that been?
Every jurisdiction is a little bit different. And so this is Oklahoma, but let's imagine sort of nationally how we're looking at this. If he were to violate that OFP, and that can sometimes be you stay 100 yards away from me. It might be you can't call me, you can't text me, you can't send me something on Facebook, you can't do anything on Instagram. I mean, any of those could be violations. When they violate, that automatically turns it into a criminal case. And that's what makes it different, is that now what you're doing is you're violating a court order. You're not coming after her. You're essentially coming after the court. And as a result, it becomes a criminal case. In many of these instances and in many jurisdictions, what these are relatively minor in terms of criminal offenses. You'll see these as misdemeanors, but also they're enhanceable, which means they can get really bad really fast. So the first one might be a misdemeanor. The second one might be a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor. Frequently, at least in my jurisdiction, that third one over a 10-year window is a felony automatically. And depending upon somebody's criminal record, even the misdemeanors could be very, very serious because they could trigger probation violations. They could result in jail themselves. A lot of things can happen, but what it really does is it brings the police into the system, sort of like what we were talking about earlier, where do you bring him in earlier or do you wait till after that OFP is filed, signed by the judge, and then the police are involved if anything were to happen? The idea is to stop this, and that ideally the OFP in itself would be enough. But there are those instances, and I've seen them too, where this is exactly that could be the result, if not just the violation of that OFP.
And when it comes to this was just a, I don't know how big of an impact it had on the overall case, but when it comes to the criminal investigation, he was accused as a youth basketball coach of kissing and touching a 15-year-old female who allegedly was on his basketball team. And then, that is brought to police in Owasso, Oklahoma. And then there's just kind of this, I guess, because on one hand, Sean Duffy was a member of the Osage tribe. On the other hand, the school where he was allegedly coaching was on Native American land. I'm just going to read the quote from the news release here, that the incident was considered a major crime under the Federal Major Crimes Act in Indian country. The report listing the crime of lewd molestation of a minor was sent to the U.S. Attorney's Office for review, ending the jurisdiction of the Owasso Police Department over this reported incident. Like, what does that actually mean in all of this, and like where the criminal investigation was at the time of Sean Duffy's death?
Right. So let's think about who gets to prosecute. And that really is the question. So for instance, if you're in New York State, that means it's going to be either the local jurisdiction or it might be at the state level, generally speaking, unless it's a federal crime. And then even then, the feds would step in. So if somebody was doing insider trading, that becomes a federal question. The feds are the ones who actually prosecute that case from the Southern District of in Manhattan. That might happen in that way. But when we're talking about Indian land, it changes. But it's also a jurisdictional question. So in some ways, it is similar to what I was talking about with the insider trading. What we have here is somebody who is a member of a tribe, and this happened on Indian land, which means that the tribe has jurisdiction. And based upon how this has been set up basically nationally, sometimes there is some cooperation between the Indian tribes and the state, where on minor stuff, it could be a simple charge. It could be a DWI, a drunk driving case. There's usually an agreement where it's the local jurisdiction, if not the tribe itself, who's prosecuting, right? But when you're talking about a major crime like sexual assault, like molestation, then the feds themselves, the U.S. Attorney's Office steps in for the prosecution. That doesn't in itself mean, though, that the police would not have been involved locally in terms of the prosecution of him, because some of those investigations were already done at the local level. But it's the prosecutors at the AUSA's office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, who are the ones who are actually responsible for the prosecution. Remember, he had not even been charged yet. The investigation was only, relatively speaking, brand new. It's just that they came in and said, it's ours. We are the ones who are going to prosecute it. And that's how they would do that. It happens sometimes in sexual assault cases. It sometimes handles and becomes the case in like child pornography cases. Because it crosses state lines, it becomes federal.
And when it comes to the criminal case, you have this 15-year-old victim, and she shouldn't be forgotten in this story, because that's incredibly traumatic of what was alleged against Sean Duffy in that particular case. Obviously, he is dead, so he cannot be a defendant in the case anymore. But like, what happens to those allegations? I mean, clearly he's not here, but like, what more can be done for someone who went through something like that from what had been alleged in this case?
Yeah, this is brutal, because this young girl is a victim. She is. And that is the answer. The thing is there is no criminal case. The criminal case is essentially over. It has never been charged. What could she do? I think realistically, the only thing that she could do is sue, or her family on her behalf could sue the estate of Duffy. That's what they could do. And that way she could get at least some redemption, some maybe treatment, maybe something that would help her move forward and overcome the struggles that she will now face because of his, well, at least the allegations of what he did.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next, if anything. I mean, there's just no doubt. I mean, this is just such a horrific case. And it's tough to have the conversations about domestic violence after the fact when you see that there were certainly red flags about his behavior. But then it goes to this point. It's just terrible. Jack Rice, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former CIA officer. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.